Welcome back, friends. You're listening to episode 3 of the study brought to you by darkknightrecords.com. Go to darkknightrecords.com, listen and download to all previous episodes. Today, friends, is June 15th, 2016, and the only thing we need to talk about right now is that we have a problem. We're sick. We have an epidemic. The gun disease. The gun problem. Now, before we get started, let it be known, the gun problem, when I say the gun problem, I'm not referring to people owning guns. Gun owners are not the problem. Radical religious extremists in the United States with regard to mass shootings are not the problem. We have to ask tougher questions and dig deeper than your Second Amendment rights and the right to protect yourself, like the right to live and not be shot. So, that being said, my friends and family, those of you with guns, those of you making the choice to use lethal force if necessary to protect the people you love, I say to you, be safe, and may that never have to happen to you. I don't feel, as I said, the gun owners or supporters are the problem. Nobody alive today had anything to do with the development of firearms, from the bow and arrow to the single shot, and eventually multiple round, even semi or fully automatic weapons. They were already around when you were born. Everybody listening to this podcast. There are broader questions to ask and deeper talks to have about this issue. How can we expect to move forward and progress when conversations often end with something like agree to disagree, or I'll keep my gun, thanks, or Second Amendment this? But the main reason we're talking about this tribe, some call Americans, a meaningless fucking term if I've ever heard one, because you can all relate to it. You're here. Some of you may live in, have lived in, have family that's lived in, or are not far from a place where gun violence has affected you. I know that my family in Orlando, for you guys, this one is touched pretty close to home. We're not here with solutions today. We're just going to have this conversation intelligently, and hopefully after we all give this more serious thought, which I have faith that you will, we'll be able to have more optimum tools for addressing this issue with each other and with our kids, because we are going to be teaching our kids about guns from whatever perspective, their parents take. We're going to be teaching our kids gun safety, like it or not. We're going to be teaching them to make smart decisions, whatever those decisions may be. We're going to ask some tough questions, and we're going to go right into it now that this little disclaimer is over. Let's begin. Question. Without background checks, without mandatory background checks for gun purchases, how do you prevent felons or terrorists from buying guns? Question. How do you feel about the fact that a person on the terrorist watch list can't legally board a plane but can legally buy guns? Question. How do you feel about unlimited gun purchases at gun shows? Question. Why is it illegal, due to NRA lobbying, for the ATF to keep digital or computerized records of gun sales? Question. Why did the gun lobby boycott Smith & Wesson for trying to make safer guns, resulting in 40% sales plummets, 2 plants going under, hundreds being unemployed, and a strong message sent? One more question, for now. How do you feel about the United States currently having more gun stores than Starbucks and McDonald's combined? And that's legal gun stores. We're not talking black market. And how do you feel about the 5% of those legal gun stores that outnumber Starbucks and McDonald's combined, that are commonly referred to as bad apple stores, who are responsible for about 90% of guns recovered from crime scenes? These are some of the questions that don't usually make the conversation when we bring up this gun issue, particularly online. People get more bold online. I don't have to explain this to you guys. You understand what it means to have a Facebook argument. Online, it's very easy to use slogans, use catchphrases like, I have a right to protect myself. A good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. I don't want to be a helpless victim. Things like this. What do we do about no background checks? And how easy it is for people with violent histories of drug abuse, histories of arrests, DUIs, and stuff. How do we keep guns out of the hands of these people, which I think most of us can agree shouldn't be armed with things like legal semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles? I think you and I can agree on that, right? People with violent pasts, people who have beaten their spouses, have had histories of reckless behavior that can endanger the public. You wouldn't want people like this to own machine guns. There's something wrong when to get a job, to go to school, for lots of everyday shit, we're okay to subject ourselves to a background check, which really is your references being asked about you, your exes, ex-spouses, your ex-employers, your friends, to see your criminal history, if there is one or not, and how it can affect you possibly owning a gun. That's all it would be. You have a constitutional right to own a weapon. And we're not talking about disarming. I'm not trying to convince anybody out there to disarm. I don't want you to get rid of your gun. If that's the choice you made, I want you to be smart. Whatever your decision, whatever your thoughts, be smart. Think it over. And don't be closed-minded. What do we do about the fact that in most states, you can be given a gun by a friend or family member legally? How do we keep guns out of the hands of desperate people in a time of artificial scarcity, low-paying wages, and all kinds of shit produced by a money system? How do you keep desperate people from doing what they have to do to not starve? Does it bother us? Does it bother us that people can go to gun shows and buy as much body armor, as much ammunition as they want? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about them doing it without a background check? Does it make you feel safe? Does it make you feel like there are more good guys with guns now? What are your thoughts about how we stop people who are on the terrorist watch list from buying guns? I think we can agree that people on the terrorist watch list at least should be questioned. What do you know about the NRA? Besides that if you join you get discounts at shooting ranges and on weapons. What is it the NRA does that clouds this conversation from being had intelligently between all of us? Like I mentioned before, a lot of the times this gun conversation starts online. We usually have our minds made up about how we feel about the situation before we even begin typing, before that first stroke of the keyboard. We already know where we stand on this issue. I personally already know that when I see a video online of people teaching their young boys what an AR-15, what a Glock is, and laying them out on the table for them to pick up and handle properly, I feel like we're fucking up royally. Not to say that kids shouldn't learn about guns, but it is an irrelevant education they're getting. It's irrelevant to their world. They're not going to be solving their problems with guns. The likelihood of a bad guy with a gun breaking into your house is fucking low. It's a cowboy fantasy had by way too many about being that person who whips out their concealed or their right to protect themselves, shoots down the bad guy with a gun, saves the day, and can say, see, a good guy with a gun, stop the bad guy with a gun. It's fucking delusional. Having a gun in the home only increases the likelihood that a family member will shoot another family member, statistically. Anyway, there are people in this world, in this country, next door neighbors of yours, who refer to their gun collection as cool and pretty to look at. What does this say about a person? Cool and pretty to look at. You know, I ask myself sometimes, why is it that other things that are compared to guns, when this gun conversation is had with regard to their danger, and why don't we just ban this and take away our this too, as long as we're going after our guns? When things like smart gun legislation, like mandatory background checks, are brought up. Mandatory background checks, by the way, which about 74, 75, 76% of NRA members support. Whenever this is brought up, the conversation closes before it opens. Things like knives and wrenches that you can use to kill somebody. All these things have a first purpose. And I think it's ignorant not to consider this. You can kill a human being with lots of things. A pencil, a pen, a box cutter, a weight at the gym, You could kill a person with a bucket of water. You could kill a person with a rake, a rope, your shoelace. Chemicals found in your home. Yet, these things are intended and designed to do a job, to cut fruit, to carve wood, to twist screws, to break wood, to aid in building, to wash stains, to tie shoes. All of these things have intended purposes. What is the intended purpose of a gun? Does it help us live longer? Does it increase our health? Does it lower our cholesterol? Learn another language faster? Does owning a gun improve your push-up game? Does owning a gun mean you're not a helpless victim? All of these things that come into question from time to time by people who go directly to fear of their guns being taken away have first purposes. Don't ever forget it. So the argument that knives and such should be banned also is ignorant. We're talking about getting rid of assault rifles like Australia did 20 years ago, and since then they've seen a 50% decrease in gun violence. I don't know. People wouldn't be happy with rubber bullets. I know people might think that rubber bullets will be ineffective in stopping a bad guy with a gun or a knife or something. But I challenge you to let someone shoot you down with rubber bullets and see how long you can text while being shot with rubber bullets. See how long you can pin somebody down while being shot with rubber bullets. It'd be interesting to find out how ineffective they are. Sure, rubber bullets may not do the job. But that makes me think about the fact that we use live ammunition for target practice. We use lethal rounds to shoot paper. It doesn't just seem like a waste of bullets that could potentially be plugging holes in bad guys with a gun. It also seems unnecessary. Rubber bullets would do the job for target practice. They could be collected and reused. I don't know. Are they that much different that you have to use lethal shots to shoot paper, which is nothing like what a live shooter scenario would be like? Are you really getting a more realistic feel by shooting an idle target with lethal rounds? I don't know. Just asking a question. A lot of people worry about our Second Amendment rights. The Constitution guarantees your Second Amendment right to own a gun. Legally, they can't do anything about it. But then again, this is the government we're talking about, and legally, they do a lot of illegal shit that they're not supposed to do anyway. What about a person's right to not be choked by NYPD? What about a person's right not to get tased into a fucking coma? What about a woman's right to do whatever the fuck she wants to do with her body? What about the right to flee a war zone to try to make a better life for yourself here in the States, while a fucking demagogue talks about building walls? I'm just asking. There's a documentary out called Under the Gun that I recommend everybody watch. Mark and Jackie Barden were the parents of Daniel, who was 7 years old and was one of the 20 first graders shot at the Sandy Hook massacre. It's sad because, once again, here we are. The sick loop of breaking news, a grieving public, and that same question, why did it happen? As is stated in the documentary Under the Gun. A woman named Victoria Montgomery from Open Carry, Texas, who apparently are known for aggressively open carrying to public places like restaurants and chain stores, says, if I have my gun on me, I don't fear anything. Now, it's easy to say things like that. It's easy to say what would and wouldn't happen in a scenario where you have to do something to protect your life. If it only takes about 8 hours of training to own a concealed weapons license, what makes people think that they'd be ready with limited training and probably 0 hours of completed active shooter scenario training? What makes people feel like they are ready for a situation to pop off? Would you feel comfortable stepping into the octagon and going toe-to-toe with a UFC fighter that weighs as much as you after only 8 hours of training? Would you be confident? Would you be confident you could take that guy down hand-to-hand in a public scuffle where you're trying to be the good guy with fists and feet? Would you be confident of your 8 hours of training and your idle punching bag, kicking and punching practice that you can save the day? See, I don't know about If I had my gun on me, I don't fear anything. I can think of lots of things that would be scary as hell, even if you're in a scenario where there's an active shooter with your gun. First of all, it's not the way they want it to seem. People who say things like good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun often have this fantasy of being that good guy with a gun and stopping the bad guy with a gun, as if it's easy, as if you'll see them highlighted like a video game and you'll know that they're the bad guy. You plug them real quick, tragedy prevented. A lot of times, as in the movie theater during the Dark Knight shooting, as some call, most people didn't know where the shooting was coming from. One of the people who survived the attack was a gun owner and said that had he had his gun on him that day, it would not have been good. More people probably would have died. There's chaos. A lot of times, people don't know what people are running from when a gun goes off in a public place. No amount of training prepares you for that kind of situation. Considering how different all situations in public shootings are, and the multiple interacting variables that go along with causing confusion and chaos, it's not so easy as identifying the bad guy and taking him out. And that's the fantasy that is perpetuated by people who like to say that a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun, or that they won't be the helpless victim. I don't understand the brandishing. I don't get it. I don't get it. But that's for another day. Sure, it's your right, but rights can be taken away. People go to jail without trial. People serve decades in solitary confinement. Sometimes they see solitary confinement for stealing a backpack. What about a person's right not to be in a fucking cage over stealing a backpack? So when you talk about rights, you got to talk about rights all across the board, not just your right to own a gun. It's bigger than that. It's crazy. Gun owners don't want more mass shootings. People who want smart, common sense gun regulation don't want mass shootings anymore. I think there are bigger things that we can agree on. I think there's more we don't know about this issue than there is we do know. And that's a big deal, because if we don't have a reference of information, if we don't know what really makes it this easy to get guns in the United States, whether it's gifted to you, bought in large quantities legally with no background check through the gun show loophole, I think there are bigger things that we can agree on. I think there are bigger questions we can ask and smarter points to address in the conversation. And I trust that you all, my friends and family, listeners, mi gente, will be smart enough to consider more than what you already know. For example, in the time it takes the documentary Under the Gun to play, 22 people in the United States will be shot, and 6 of those will die. According to the movie, nearly two-thirds of all gun laws passed in the 12 months after Sandy Hook eased restriction and expanded the rights of gun owners. 90% of Americans support universal background checks, and yet we still don't have it. Why? The public has spoken. Gun sales rise every time a mass shooting occurs, according to the experts, because a lot of people are fear-mongered into believing that the government is going to ban certain weapons and come for their guns, as is often stated. States with more guns account for more gun deaths, while, shockingly, states with less guns account for less deaths. Who would have thought? The laws are as effective as this. I can't buy a gun for you, but I can buy 1 or 2 for me and give 1 or 2 to you. Goes to show you how effective laws are at stopping problems. As Jacques Fresco puts it, laws are man-made attempts to solve a problem. Laws don't solve problems. Now, this bothered me a lot to learn. Apparently, after there's a gun crime, police contact the ATF to search for the gun owner and origin using serial numbers with no computer or digital database. They use manual searches through microfilm, digital images, and boxes of records, but no computer files. And according to ATF Special Agent Charles Hauser, the ATF receives, on average, at their National Tracing Center, over 1 million records per month. And once they exceed 10,000 boxes on the floor, their facility is in danger of collapsing. So at the time of the interview, 2 or 3 shipping containers full of excess records were being stored outside for safety reasons that are sifted through in the summer heat and the winter snow by hand. So that means if you or someone you know is hurt or killed by a gun, this is what they have to go through to help you find the person responsible and trace the gun back to the owner and maybe hold someone accountable. This is what they have to go through to help you. ATF trace requests between 1989 and 2014 looked something like this. In 1989, they received about 2,372 requests, which back then going through by hand was pretty much the only choice you had. In 1994, they received 77,414. By 2004, the number was up to 259,178 requests. And as of 2014, the ATF manually sifts through 364,441 trace requests per year by hand. And as a result of this, 30% of traces will fail and the crime will go unsolved. According to Illinois' Democratic Congresswoman Robin Kelly, kids in the United States are 4 times more likely to be shot as kids in Canada, 7 times more likely to be shot as kids in Israel, 65 times more likely to be shot than kids in Great Britain. These are cultures that watch the same movies as us, play the same video games as us, know more about our culture than we know about theirs, yet behave very differently than us. Mark Barden, the father of Daniel at the Sandy Hook Elementary massacre, stated during the movie that 32,000 gun-related deaths a year happen in the United States. And if that kind of number were a virus or a terrorist organization, that people wouldn't stand for it. I tend to agree with that thinking. Another thing I learned, according to National Affairs editor for Mother Jones, Mark Folman, in a study of 70 public mass shootings, found that there were no incidents of a good guy with a gun stopping the tragedy. That's a study of 70 public mass shootings. 0 good guys with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. According to the film, on average, a background check takes about 90 seconds to complete. And if something is flagged, the FBI has 72 hours to look into things that may prohibit a person from owning a firearm, like mental illness, being a non-citizen, or as they put it, illegal, which is total bullshit. Illegal person or undocumented person, have a history of possible drug addiction or any prior convictions, things like that. But when those central computer database background checks often take more than 3 days and the gun sale goes through by default. As a result of this kind of shit, over 1 million guns to date have slipped through the cracks this way, allowing over 50,000 guns to go to people who would have not passed a background check to own a gun, including the mass shooter in Charleston who killed 9 people in church. According to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, people with a prior criminal history of alcohol abuse, DUIs, domestic violence, and prior convictions are far more likely to shoot someone than a person with a history of mental illness. So mentally ill people can no longer be the scapegoat for a problem like this, because there are mentally ill people doing amazing things for themselves, trying to better themselves. Mental illness should not be synonymous with an unstable person. No. A mentally ill person needs help and is not necessarily a danger to themselves or other people. Because mentally ill people don't pass laws that make it this fucking easy to get guns. Mentally ill people don't manufacture the firearms. I'm just saying. In 2013, we had about 33,000 gun deaths in the United States. 21,000, or about 64% of those, were suicides. This opens the gun discussion to more than just Second Amendment talk and rights talk and helpless victim talk, but rather to public health talk, because the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control, is trying to make the gun issue a public health issue, which I think is a far better way of looking at it than how most of us look at it today. In 1993, a CDC-sponsored study showed evidence that a gun in the home only increases 3-fold the likelihood of one family member being shot by another. And the NRA lobbied to defund gun research as a result of that study. And they won big. Since 1996, as a result of NRA lobbying, gun research funding has decreased by 96%. And of those available funds, none of them can be used to advocate or promote gun control. That is fucked up. So this discussion could go on forever, and we're going to do a part 2 in episode 4. We're also going to be joined by Deuce, my co-host, in part 2 of the discussion. For now, friends, think about the gun issue with an open mind. Remember that it affects all of us, no matter what your patriotic background, your military background, no matter whether you work as a postman, a teacher, whether you're unemployed and homeless, whether you're a police officer, firefighter, this shit affects us all. And we need to start thinking about the issue more intelligently and try our best not to get emotional about the issue and understand that at the end of the day, we want the same things. We don't want people getting shot. So I leave you with one last bit of information. Pete Blair, the director of ALERT, that's ALERRT, Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training, they have trained over 80,000 police officers to respond to active shooter events. They have a facility in Texas. Pete Blair states that about 1 in every 5 active shooter event is stopped by a potential victim at the scene, and most of which are unarmed. According to the FBI report, a study from 2000 to 2013, which Blair co-authored, it states that statistically only 3% of incidents of live shooter events stopped by a civilian is done so by a good guy with a gun. That means 97% of bad guys with guns found in this study between 2000 and 2013 stopped by a civilian or potential victim. 97% who stopped the bad guy with the gun were unarmed, according to this study. We'll come back to this discussion in episode 4. Friends and family, I ask you guys to be safe. The people in Orlando and Sandy Hook and Aurora and all over this fucking country need more than your thoughts and prayers. They need your activism. They need your action. They need us to wake up and do something. And it begins with educating ourselves. It begins with having smart conversation. And it begins with seeing the bigger picture. We'll talk more about the Orlando shooting at the Pulse nightclub, where about 50 people died and over 50 more were injured through another legally purchased assault rifle shooting spree. And like I said, be safe. Human suffering is human suffering. We're all one, my family. Somos uno, mi gente. See you next time. Peace.